Good evening, everyone. Welcome to everybody. I just taking a second, real quick, making sure everything is set up. It's so great to see everybody. Hope y'all are doing well. I am here in Columbus, Ohio, and probably it's just a gorgeous day. It's about 75 degrees outside. All of my neighbors are out currently mowing their lawns. And so it's one of those perfect days. We're expecting some storms coming through here in a little bit, but everything's looking great right now. So it's truly a beautiful day. So I hope it's a beautiful day wherever you are. I don't know where you're coming from, as usual. Let me know where you're coming in from, where you're tuning in from, and the rest. And so I have started keeping track a little bit about where everybody is coming from, and from what I'm getting and seeing, we have people as far as China and Nigeria, and then Texas and Washington State. Had a couple from Maine and the rest. So it's just fascinating to see how many people are coming in from all over the place. Absolutely love all of it. It's absolutely just a lot of fun. And so I'm so grateful for you and for your time and for joining us on this little journey through God in the Dock with C.S. Lewis. Um, as I noticed, I am back in Columbus. Grateful to be back here. I had just spent a wonderful couple of days in Houston with a dear friend of mine by the name of Wayne Roberts and his wonderful wife, Tammy. Got a chance to meet a lot of people I'd never met before down in the Houston area, quite a few churches and in the area, just some fantastic people. And it really was just kind of a joyous time. I was trying to think back if I'd been there before, and I couldn't think of a time where I'd been to Houston because I have this bad habit of constantly mixing up Houston and Austin. Been to Austin quite a few times, and then Houston for whatever reason I kind of lump it in the same boat for whatever reason, and then completely forgot. My mom mentioned this afternoon. Completely forgot that my aunt and uncle live in Houston, and so I feel terrible now for having been down there and not tried to connect with them in those moments. So hopefully the next time I get a chance, they are truly wonderful. Look forward, hopefully, to see them again. Great churches down there, Memorial Church of Christ, and I think there was people from the Katy Church of Christ, the Fifth and Ward, Champion. There was just so many great churches got a chance to connect with while I was down there, kind of speaking on their kind of ministers and leaders area wide that they do, and got a chance to connect with them. So it really was a wonderful time. So, with that having been said, all of those things, here we are tonight as we continue on. Tonight's an interesting one. In fact, it's as many of you probably noticed as we've been going through God in the Dock, there's these little changes, little things that go along from a response to a debate that changed the outcome of one of his books to an article responding in a magazine to a live discussion that was on at a factory during World War II's with bombings and all sorts of stuff to tonight, kind of an abstract concept where he's writing to a fictitious person that he's kind of made up that represents the spirit of the time, but he's also responding to the things that are going on in culture in that moment. And so, with no further ado, we're just going to dive right in and see where we are in this thing called Myth Became Fact. Now, as we start off, it is obviously kind of imperative for us to have a deep understanding of who this is and who it is that he's speaking and the terminologies, especially. Because in our modern context, and even in the context of his day, myth is a fascinating word. In fact, when you hear myth and when I hear myth, most of the time we go, not real. And this is something he's going to argue. And you also have to remember that Lewis was a literature professor. And so the concept of that which is real and the concept of story and the concept of storytelling and mythology, he will utilize terminologies a bit different than the way that we do. And it's important for us to actually acknowledge it and see those types of things. So, first of all, the background and context. Lewis wrote Myth Became Fact to defend the Christian narrative, specifically the incarnation and resurrection, as a unique fusion of both myth and historical fact, countering modernist skepticism that dismissed Christianity as mere mythology. So myth is different than mythology. We'll get into some of that there. So the essay articulates Lewis's concept of Christianity as a true myth, a story that resonates with universal mythic patterns but is grounded in historical reality. It was part of his broader kind of apologetic project to make Christianity really intellectually credible and emotionally compelling to a very skeptical secular audience. And I do need to note, Our audience is no difference today. We are a very skeptical people, very secular audience. In fact, maybe even more so. It's hard really because everyone always thinks you're either the greatest generation or the worst generation, one way or the other. But this is what Lewis was attempting to do, at least. So this essay was likely written in the early 1940s. We don't know exactly, with most sources pointing to 1944 as the probable year of composition. It was first published in the periodical World Dominion in 1944 before being included in the posthumous collection God in the Dot in 1970, the one that we're reading right now. The precise date of writing is not explicitly documented, but its style and kind of themes align with Lewis's wartime apologetic works, such as Screwtape Letters and Mere Christianity and the rest. The early 20th century saw a surge in secular thought, with intellectuals like Sigmund Freud and James Frazer, who's author of The Golden Bough, interpreting religious stories, including Christianity, as psychological or anthropological myths. Lewis, a scholar of literature familiar with Frazer's work, sought to reclaim the term myth from its pejorative use. So that's a big part of what this is. In fact, you're going to see this quite a bit. He argued that myths carry profound truths that Christianity fulfills these truths historically. The essay implicitly counters the modernist tendency to reduce Christianity to a primitive fable, incompatible with rational thought. So this idea that it's just a story, it's not really, there's no truth to it at all, and the rest. It's just fun stories that people believe, but it's no longer for us modern people and the rest. Lewis is going to dismiss that all outright. So the essay's core idea, that Christianity is a myth that became fact, stems from a pivotal 1931 conversation at Oxford's Magdalen College between Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, you might have heard of him, and Hugo Dyson. All of them were part of what's called the Inklings. At the time, Lewis, recently converted to theism, but not yet Christianity, struggled with the gospel narratives, viewing them as just another set of myths. So you got to remember, his journey of faith went from a premise of he believed as a child, lost his faith during World War I, then came back and became a theist that believed that that there was a God, but didn't really come to Christianity until about a year or two later. The famous riding alongside on the famous Road to the Zoo trip with his brother Warney, where he said, I left believing there was a God, and by the time I arrived at the zoo, I believed Jesus was the Son of God. It was, that premise there. So he notes in his autobiographies and letters and the rest that Tolkien argued that myths are not lies, but reflections of divine truth, and that Christianity is the true myth where God entered history. So basically, they're taking into account this concept of that all cultures and all places historically have all had myth, have all had stories, and concepts and things that get passed down by time, and these myths created within them have truths found within them. And so where the modernist was kind of saying all these things are completely nonsense, they couldn't have happened, they didn't happen, the true myth, as Tolkien would argue, where God entered history. This conversation Lewis is recounting through Lewis's letters and biographies profoundly shaped myth became fact. The essay can be seen as a public articulation of that private epiphany, of that private conversation that they had all those years back. The essay opens with Lewis addressing Corineus, a fictional skeptic who argues that modern Christians cling to a hollowed-out version of Christianity, stripped of its barbarous doctrines. Corineus represents the kind of the intellectual critics Lewis encounters in Oxford's academic circles and in broader society, figures like Bertrand Russell or H.G. Wells, who viewed Christianity as outdated nonsense. And I'll be honest with you, this isn't very different in modern academia even today, or on a campus like where I'm at right now at The Ohio State University. You find that all the time. They view Christianity as outdated. While not a direct response to a specific person, Corineus embodies the modernist critique that Christianity's mythic elements, which is the miracles, the resurrection, so in this case, the resurrection of Jesus himself, the incarnation of Jesus as God became man, those are embarrassing relics. And so Lewis uses Corineus to kind of frame his defense, arguing that the mythic quality of Christianity is its strength, not a weakness. And so in writing this for World Dominion, which was a Christian missionary magazine, it was suggested it was intended for a thoughtful Christian readership grappling with how to defend their faith in a Christian age and in a skeptical age, especially a skeptical age. My guess that might be you. That may be you tonight as you're listening along, that And it is my hope that this letter might give you just another bow in your string, in essence, another arrow in the quiver in defense of Christianity. So the essay's kind of concise conversational style indicates it was meant to be accessible yet intellectually rigorous. Lewis, especially I would say in our modern vernacular, Lewis is at times challenging. It was likely aimed at both lay readers and clergy. Its placement in God in the Dock under clearly theological essays underscore its roles as a theological apologetic. It's viewed by that as by the editor himself. So let's look at some definitions real quick. So the word myth itself. The standard definition is a traditional story, often involving supernatural beings or events that explain cultural beliefs, natural phenomena, or moral truths, typically regarded as fictional or symbolic. And when we hear fictional, we hear not true, symbolic, as in they mean something that is true, but they're not true in and of themselves. And that's part of the problem, I think, with how we often use this word today. Lewis uses his usage of this term as Lewis redefines myth as a narrative that captures universal, pre-rational truths about reality, transcending mere fiction. Myths are not necessarily false. They convey profound insights through story, resonating with human longing and experience. An example of this is there's quite a few what are called myth stories or mythologies of the ancient world when it comes to a global flood. And you might wonder, well, where would those come from? Well, they were speaking of, as Lewis would look at it, is they capture a universal, pre-rational truth about reality, something that happened that when people look back on it, looking back would go, that surely didn't happen that way. It was just a myth. It was just kind of created to give voice to what they were experiencing in the moment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was true or that it really happened in those ways. Then there's the use of the word fact. The standard definition is something that is known or proven to be true, an event or situation that has objective, verifiable evident existence in reality. For Lewis, a fact is a historical or objective event that occurred in time and space. In the essay, he emphasizes that the Christian story is not just a symbolic myth, but a factual account of God's actions in history. He sees the Bible and he sees those as historical fact, not historical myth. The standard definition of the word truth, now this is an interesting one because in our modern world, this is even more convoluted. The quality or state of being in accordance with fact or reality, a statement or belief that accurately reflects an objective state of affairs. Now, you think of how we use truth. Your truth is your truth. You can be whatever you want to be, man, woman, truth has become so relative in our world that it's lost its entire meaning. Lewis distinguishes truth as propositional, abstract, and specific, always about something. Truths are intellectual formulations derived from reality or myth, often losing some of the richness of the original experience. So reality is another one. The standard definition is the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional idea, the quality of being real or having objective existence. Reality for Lewis is the fundamental pre-abstract essence of existence, that about which truth is. It's deeper than propositional truth, encompassing the raw, unfiltered truth of being. It is reality itself. Then there's abstraction. Some of you might have read this and be like, I don't really know what he's referencing when it comes to abstraction. This process of generalizing or isolating a concept from specific instances, a concept or idea removed from concrete reality. So you have something that is real, that has happened, and then you're giving an abstract or abstracting it from its original context or what actually happened. Abstraction refers to the intellectual process of distilling specific truths or ideas from concrete experiences or myths. Lewis sees it as necessary but limited human activity that fragments the fullness of reality. And so we'll get into this a little bit more. Then some of this I know can be hard, but don't worry. Keep pushing forward. There's something fascinating within this. Experience itself. Direct observation or participation in events. Knowledge or skill gained through involvement in or exposure to something. Lewis uses experience to describe immediate, sensory, or personal encounters with reality, as opposed to abstract reasoning or propositional truths. And we'll get into some, it'd be the concept of, for example, of if I stub my toe in the moment, I am experiencing the pain of stubbing my toe. I can feel it. It's coursing up my entire body. I may or may not have done this earlier today, which is why I'm using it as an example. Stub my toe, I can feel it, but I'm not thinking about stubbing my toe in that moment. I'm experiencing it. Right now, I'm thinking back on that, but I'm not experiencing it anymore. I'm merely thinking about that. That those are two different things. One is the experience, the other one is the abstraction. I've abstracted it from its actual context, and it's different. I don't feel the pain. I might empathize with my pain, I might remember it, but I'm not experiencing it in the same way. Those are two separate things. It's one of the things that makes us unique as people. Then there's the concept of thought. So this is where I kind of got into that a little bit there. The process of using the mind to consider, reason, or reflect, the product of mental activities such as ideas or judgments. Thought refers to human rational processes, particularly abstract reasoning or intellectual analysis, which Lewis sees as limited compared to the reality conveyed by myth. And we'll get into that. It'll be fun. So God itself. And God himself, the supreme being, creator, ultimate reality in monotheistic religions, often characterized as omnipotent, omniscient, and benevolent. God is the ultimate reality and source of all myths, particularly the Christian myth. Now, again, when you read this, you have to think about how he's using this terminology. Mythology and myth itself, the way that we use it often seems like a pejorative thing, like we're saying something is not true. He's saying that all things from myths speak forth truths that ultimately come down to the fact that God is the true myth. God is the true thing that stepped into history and all the amazing things. Because when we read books about heroes and books about and we desire to want to be them in those ways. He's saying the scriptures were that way, but they weren't just they weren't just myth in that we wanted them to be true. They were true myth. They were actually true. All of the things of the Bible are actually true, which makes them true myth, not just literature, not just stories of old, but actually real, which makes it even better, which is how he's using this terminology. So the incarnation. In Christian theology, the act of God becoming human in the person of Jesus Christ, uniting divine and human natures. The incarnation is a central event where myth becomes fact. Lewis sees it as the moment when the universal pattern of myth, the dying and rising God, becomes a historical reality in Christ. Here's where Lewis is kind of looking back and thinking about how many other cultures historically have actually noted the idea of a God who has come, a God who has died, a God who is resurrected. There's a lot of mythologies that speak to that. In his case, he's going, those myths became true fully in Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. This is where he's using kind of the cultural arguments of the day, which many modernists don't make today. They don't make these same arguments as the one he's having to deal with. But he's saying, even if they were, they came true in Jesus Christ. And that is why it's important for us to understand true myth. So let's read this fairly short reading in and of itself. It's sometimes, depending on what your edition is, it could be either 3 pages or 5 pages long. It's not very long, but we'll dive into it together. My friend Corenaeus has advanced the charge that none of us are in fact Christians at all. According to him, historic Christianity is something so barbarous that no modern man can really believe it. The moderns who claim to do so are in fact believing a modern system of thought which retains the vocabulary of Christianity and exploits the emotions inherited from it while quietly dropping its essential doctrines. Corenaeus compared modern Christianity to the modern English monarchy. The forms of kingship has been retained, but the reality has been abandoned. So in essence, he's kind of giving it this fact that he's using the modern monarchy as a premise there in the UK, that we kept the things that we liked, but we didn't keep the things that we don't like anymore. You don't really need it. So the reason they kept the monarchy is because it gives us order and pomp and circumstance, and it gives us a reason to be proud of our nation and the rest because we have the royal family or whatever it may be. And the same thing is said, we've kept the things we've learned from Christianity. We've gotten rid of all the stuff that's nonsense, the miracles and all the rest of stuff. None of that is necessary in and of itself. That was this modernist argument. All this I believe to be false, except for of a few modernist theologians who by God's grace become fewer every day. I always love that little line there. Said who by God's grace these academics are becoming fewer and fewer. I wish that was the case. But for the moment, let us assume that Corenaeus is right. Let us pretend, for purposes of argument, that all who now call themselves Christians have abandoned the historic doctrines. Let us suppose that modern Christianity reveals a system of names and ritual, formulae and metaphors, which persist although the thoughts behind it have changed. Quirinius ought to be able to explain the persistence. So let's say if all those things are gone and all those things, all we're left with is just this pomp and circumstance and traditions and so forth, you have to be able to explain why they're still here. Why, on his view, do all these educated and enlightenment pseudo Christians insist on expressing their deepest thoughts in terms of an archaic mythology which must hamper and embarrass them at every turn? Why do they refuse to cut the umbilical cord which binds the living and flourishing child to its moribund mother? For if Quirinius is right, it should be a great relief for them to do so. Yet the odd thing is that even those who seem most embarrassed by the sentiment of barbaric Christianity is their thought becomes suddenly obstinate when you ask them to get rid of it altogether. They will strain the cord almost to breaking point, but they refuse to cut it. Sometimes they will take every step except the last one. If all who profess Christianity were clergymen, it would be easy, though uncharitable, to reply that their livelihood depends on not taking that last step. So in essence, he's basically kind of being a little I wouldn't say it's sarcastic. It's more of a playing on words, playing on things. Where he's saying, if it were the case that in reality all these Christians are pretending and they're just going through the motions, they don't really believe all this nonsense. That then why haven't they really pulled away? Why are they still doing it? If they really have that, then why haven't they walked away? And then he's going to say, well, if it's just because the clergymen are there and their livelihood depends on it. And I say this as a minister, as someone in of himself, like maybe I just do this for a job. That's his argument. I just do this for the money. Otherwise, I would walk away because I know it and obviously not to be true. So this is it's being kind of tongue in cheek with the way that he's playing this out. Yet even if this were the true cause of their behavior, even if all clergymen are intellectual prostitutes who preach for pay, and usually starvation pay, what they secretly believe to be false, surely so widespread a darkening of conscience among thousands of men not otherwise known to be criminal, itself demands explanation. And of course, the profession of Christianity is not confined to the clergy. It is professed by millions of women and laymen who earn thereby contempt, unpopularity, suspicion, and the hostility of their families. How did this come to happen? So now he's turned it around and says, how is it that we're doing this? How is it that all of these Christians, for whatever reason, even though they apparently are agree with you, and they all think it's just myth and mythology, and it's just completely made up, and what's the point? Why is it they still going through all of these, even contempt and hostility and unpopularity and doing it for no money and the rest? Like, why would they do that? So he's asking the question. He's turning it around and asking the question. Obstinacies of this sort are interesting. Why not cut the cord? Asked Quirinius. Everything would be much easier if you would free your thought from this vestigial mythology. Vestigials, this appendages growing out that are kind of capturing you. To be sure, far easier. Life would be far easier for the mother of an invalid child if she put it into an institution and adopted someone else's healthy baby instead. Life would be far easier to many a man if he abandoned the woman he has fallen in love with and married someone else because she is more suitable. The only defect of the healthy baby and the suitable woman is that they leave out the patient's only reason for bothering about a child or a wife at all. Would not conversation be much more rational than dancing? Said Jane Austen's Miss Bingley. Much more rational, replied Mr. Bingley, but much less like a ball. In the same way, it would be much more rational to abolish the English monarchy. What's the point? But how if by doing so you leave out the one element in our state which matters most? And I'll be honest with you, I don't think a lot about the English monarchy, although I can tell you from a familial line, I think it's the 14th great grandson of Henry VIII. And with that in mind, I jokingly have said for years, I kind of like my throne back. Anybody? I kind of like that one back on this one. But he's making this argument of why the monarchy matters. And I just don't spend much time on the monarchy thinking about it, although I love the British royalty and the pomps and circumstances. But here's what he's going to say. But how if by doing so you leave out the one element in our state which matters most? How if the monarchy is the channel through which all the vital elements of citizenship, loyalty, the consecration of secular life, the hierarchical principle, splendor, ceremony, continuity, still trickle down to irrigate the dust bowl of modern economic statecraft? There's a way in which he's kind of making out the monarchy to being something that gives us order, that gives us beauty, that gives us citizenship and loyalty. And I look at in the United States today, the political mess and all the rest that's going on. And I kind of understand his argument that there is maybe we miss out on why we have need order and why we need the pomp and circumstance of things. And in fact, I've noted recently that I like the concept of coming in and like there's a specific reason for doing things, and the reason for doing it is because we've decided that it needs to be done that way because it provides us order. I'm not a fan of doing things because we think it'll make us more spiritual inherently just by going through the motions. But I don't mind the idea that there's certain aspects of things where I go, oh, there's a tradition here. And the tradition is not because they think it's anything special, but because we decided a while ago that it just gives us a little bit more order in life. And maybe that's a nice thing to have. And so it's an interesting concept that he lays out here. The real answer of even the most modernist Christianity, Quirinius, is the same. Even assuming, which I most constantly deny, that the doctrines of historic Christianity are merely mythical, it is the myth which is the vital and nourishing element in the whole concern. Quirinius wants us to move with the times. Now we know where times move. They move away. But in religion, we find something that does not move away. It is what Quirinius calls the myth that abides. It is what he calls the modern and living thought that actually moves away. Not only the thought of theologians, but the thought of anti-theologians. Where are the predecessors of Quirinius? Where is the Epicureanism of Lucretius, the pagan revival of Julian the Apostate? Where are the Gnostics? Where is the monism of Averroes, the deism of Voltaire, the dogmatic materialism of the great Victorians? They have moved with the times. But the thing they were all attacking remains. Quirinius finds it still there to attack. In fact, I think, I could be wrong about this, I can't remember who exactly said it, but there was one of the great, and it may have been Freud or one of those who said that, or I think it was Freud, who said that in 100 years God would be dead, or God is dead. Basically announced that the God was going to die, that people would no longer believe in such things, and say God is very much alive in the same way that Jesus sits at the right hand of God. But in and of itself, that mindset has been there. And in fact, that's what he's arguing here is all of these philosophies and things have come and gone. And where are they now? Where are they? Because Quirinius is still arguing, in essence, against this myth, this mythology, this Christianity. But where are all the things that once came before that were the new things? And those new things have now fallen by the wayside. The myth, to speak his language, has outlived the thoughts of its defenders and all of its adversaries. It is the myth that gives life. Those elements, even in modernist Christianity, which Quirinius regards as vestigial, which are attachments, are the substance. What he takes for the real modern belief is the shadow of those things. To explain this, we must look a little closer at myth in general, and at this myth in particular. Human intellect is incurably abstract. Pure mathematics is the type of successful thought. Yet the only realities we experience are concrete. This pain, this pleasure, this dog, this man. And here's where he's getting into the very aspect of the difference between the abstract, the mind, experience, and the rest. So when I have a dog on my lap and I'm petting that dog, there's an experience of petting that dog. But as I'm talking about that dog right now, I'm not experiencing that dog. I'm thinking about that dog. It's an abstract idea about that dog. Those are different things. Why we are loving the man, bearing the pain, enjoying the pleasure, we are not intellectually apprehending pleasure, pain, or personality. So while we are doing those things, when you have a hug of someone, it's different than when you say to someone, I love you, across even something like this, an online platform. It's just different. There is the experience, and then there's the abstract. There's the mind, and there's the actual feeling. What we begin to do so, on the other hand, the concrete realities, or when we begin to do so, on the other hand, the concrete realities sink to the level of mere instances or examples. We are no longer dealing with them, but with that which they exemplify. This is our dilemma. Either to taste and not to know, or to know and not to taste. So when I'm tasting food, I'm not thinking about food. That's kind of the argument they make. And when I'm thinking about food, I'm not tasting food. Or more strictly, to lack one kind of knowledge because we are in the experience, or to lack another kind because we are outside it. As thinkers, we are cut off from what we think about. As tasting, touching, willing, loving, hating, we do not clearly understand. The more lucidly we think, the more we are cut off. The more deeply we enter into reality, the less we can think. If all you are about is experiences, then you don't necessarily think about things in and of themselves. If all you are is about thinking, then you're not experiencing. In some ways, I give this example. Um, there are a lot. One of the things I love, and I'll give a shout out to this about Freed Hardman University, where I went to school and did my undergraduate, is all the Bible professors who teach there also preach full time. Most of them do, at least at one of the small churches in the area. And one of the kind of the beautiful aspects of that is that while they are academic in their daily work, when they're teaching their students and the rest, they're still practicing it. So when they teach about preaching, it's not a purely academic thought process. They also have moments where they are doing, where they're actively doing those things. And I think at times in academia, far too many people find themselves kind of devoid of practice, of experience, because all they ever do is sit in a classroom. That there's no real life application. It's kind of devoid. It's one or the other. I do think a balance would be at play here. And so here's where he says, you cannot study pleasure in the moment of the nuptial embrace, nor repentance while repenting, nor analyze the nature of humor while roaring with laughter. But when else can you really know these things? If only my toothache would stop, I could write another chapter about pain, but once it stops, what do I know about pain? Of this tragic dilemma, myth is the partial solution. In the enjoyment of a great myth, we come nearest to experiencing as a concrete what can otherwise be understood only as an abstraction. At this moment, for example, I am trying to understand something very abstract indeed, the fading, vanishing of tasted reality as we try to grasp it with the discursive reason. Probably I have made heavy weather of it. But if I remind you instead of Orpheus and Eurydice, how he was suffered to lead her by the hand, but when he turned around to look at her, she disappeared, what was merely a principle becomes imaginable. You may reply that you never till this moment attached the meaning to the myth. Of course not. So here's kind of this understanding. Um, when you read great stories, they become alive to you. So, for example, I love the old books and old myths, and in fact, I was asked recently if I could recommend a book, and I said, go read Sherlock Holmes, go read the original Sherlock Holmes and the rest. They're fantastic books. Books and myth can make things come alive. You can both feel like you're experiencing it, but also thinking about it. So that's Lewis's argument: is that these myths, these stories of old, allow you to kind of marry these two things together, and in doing that, experiencing in ways that are different. But the more beautiful part is when you are hearing a myth that is true, it really actually happened. And that's his argument about faith and about Christianity. You are not looking for an abstract meaning at all. If that was what you were doing, the myth would be for you no true myth, but a mere allegory. You were not knowing, but tasting. But what you were tasting turns out to be a universal principle. The moment we state this principle, we are admittedly back in the world of abstraction. It is only while receiving the myth as a story that you experience the principle concretely. When we translate, we get abstraction, or rather, dozens of abstractions. What flows into you from the myth is not truth about reality. Truth is always about something, but reality is that about which truth is. And therefore, every myth becomes the father of innumerable truths on the abstract level. Myth is the mountain whence all the different streams rise, which become truths down here in the valley. In hoc valle abstractionist, or if you prefer, myth is the isthmus, which connects the peninsular world of thought with the vast continent we really belong to. There is an argument here that Lewis is making, in essence, that um, all story is like a river, and it all comes forth from the truth that is God. All stories come forth. So all mythologies and history all came forth in the beginning from God. They have truths within them. And it's a beautiful thing. It is not like truth abstract, nor it is like direct experience bound to the particular. Now, as myth transcends thought, incarnation transcends myth. The heart of Christianity is a myth, which is also a fact. The old myth of the dying God, without ceasing to be myth, comes down from the heaven of legend and imagination to the earth of history. It happens at a particular date, in a particular place, followed by definable historical consequences. This is where he's marrying all the ideas together. In essence, that God, the grand storyteller, the weaver of all things, actually lays forth the stories throughout all cultures and the rest. And that why are there cultures that speak of a God who will come and die and take form and so forth. Why do those myths happen in all these places? And they didn't happen because they knew about it. It's because the truths were universal. This is, in essence, his argument. But he says, but there is a time and place specific in history where not only did it happen and it was true myth. We pass from a Balder or an Osiris, and these are mythologies of old, dying nobody knows when or where, to a historical person crucified. It is all in order under Pontius Pilate. By becoming fact, it does not cease to be myth. That is the miracle. He said, just it came true, even though it was predicted long before. And he's kind of referencing even prophecy and the rest, because there's the story of truths of things that will happen, did happen, will happen, that flow through this all. These myths of history, they ultimately lead back to the same thing that really mattered. It is true. I suspect that men have sometimes derived more spiritual sustenance from myths they did not believe than from the religion they professed. To be truly Christian, we must both assent to the historical fact and also receive the myth, fact though it has become, with the same imaginative embrace which we accord to all myths. The one is hardly more necessary than the other. I guess the easiest way I could discern most of this would just say that Lewis, in essence, is arguing that truth flows forth from God and the mind that God has given us to reason and logic, and that these truths and the narratives and the story that we find across all cultures. In fact, I will make a fairly strong statement here that I do not believe, and I have not found any in history, any culture that is inherently atheistic. And what I mean by inherently is that there is no story, no mythology, no nothing that doesn't derive with the idea of God or the gods. I don't know of one. I know those that might claim that some modern places and the rest that became atheistic, but none that started or began that way, that do not have great stories or mythologies of the God or the gods. And this is why it's important for us to understand that, because that's part of his argument and what you'll see here. A man who disbelieved the Christian story as fact, but continually fed on its myth, would perhaps be more spiritually alive than one who assented and did not think much about it. So, for example, I have known atheists who are very good moral people, but they have no reason for their morality outside of the fact that they believe those things to be good because they believe the myth of why those things are good. The historical truths of being kind to other people is actually a good thing. And I have met many who claim Christianity who are worse morally than some of the atheists, even though they believe the stories, but they do not live the understandable truths from them. The modernist, the extreme modernist, infidel in all but name, need not be called a fool or hypocrite because he obstinately retains, even in the midst of his intellectual atheism, the language, rites, sacraments, and story of the Christians. I can say this quite candidly. I don't say or believe that atheists are inherently more evil or more immoral than the everyday person. Number one, that's not how that works. And number two, it's the assumption that people have not learned what is good or right from outside of even just what we would call the pages of Scripture. God has spoken in many ways, and cultural things have passed down across the world. Now, they all come from God, ultimately go back to God, as he is going to note through the stream and river of what he calls myth. But the reality is that there's many truths that are in this world that have gone out that all stem from God, that people have agreed to, and the rest that they have attained and they practice in their life, but not because they read the Bible. Not because they know the story of Jesus. It's because they've accepted it and done it because whether it's cultural traits and the rest. Now, I'm going to argue all of that comes from God. All of that stems from God to the beginning. And the greatest place where you will find those things is through Scripture. But it doesn't mean that God has not, his narrative has not been permeated through the world, that all might know. The poor man may be clinging with a wisdom he himself by no means understands to that which is his life. It would have been better that Loisy should have remained a Christian. This is in reference to a Catholic priest named Loisy, who basically started writing a lot of what I would call early kind of deconstruction of his in essence from Catholicism. And he was a Catholic priest, ended up being excommunicated from the Catholic, I think Pope Pius X maybe excommunicated him because of his writings in regard to scripture not being true, that it was all mythology. It's kind of this modernist concept. And so he left. He said it would have been better that Loisy should have remained a Christian. It would not necessarily have been better that he should have purged his thought of vestigial Christianity. Those who do not know that this great myth became fact when the Virgin conceived are indeed to be pitied. But Christians also need to be reminded. We may thank Coronaeus for reminding us that what became fact was a myth, that it carries with it into the world of fact all the properties of a myth. God is more than a god, not less. Christ is more than Balder, not less. So here's another way in which I can make this argument of the usage of myth. It's prophecy. It's the way we use the word prophecy, that there was things that were prophesied that hadn't come true yet, but they were prophesied to come, and that they one day would come, and that they would speak of, Isaiah 53, and that Jesus would come and fulfill those things. And then when this myth became true, this prophecy became fulfilled, that would be kind of the Christian terminology for that this myth became true myth. We must not be ashamed of the mythical radiance resting on our theology. We must not be ashamed of the miracles and the foretelling of what was going to come, and that all cultures speak of these types of things. We must not be nervous about parallels and pagan Christ, about how other groups might speak of these things having been come true. In fact, here's an argument he's going to make. They ought to be there. It would be a stumbling block if they weren't, because God has been speaking throughout history from the beginning, has been speaking. We must not, if false spirituality, withhold our imaginative welcome. If God chooses to be mythopoetic, which this is an old version of saying mythopoetic, and is not the sky itself a myth, shall we refuse to be mythopathic? Shall we refuse to be and understand story and storytelling? For this is the marriage of heaven and earth, perfect myth and perfect fact, claiming not only our love and our obedience, but also our wonder and delight, addressed to the savage, the child, and the poet, and each one of us no less than the moralist, the scholar, and the philosopher. So, what does this all mean? And I wanted to take all of that and walk through it in the way that we just did, but also maybe just give a little bit of a recap that might be helpful. So, in Myth Became Fact, Lewis explains why Christianity is special by comparing it to myths, stories like those about ancient gods or heroes that feel deep and meaningful, even if they're not true. He says our brains love abstract ideas, like defining love or bravery, but our lives are full of real, specific moments, like feeling pain or hugging a friend. The problem is when we're feeling something, we're not analyzing it. When we're analyzing, we miss the feeling. Myths are great because they mix both. They tell a story you can feel, like a movie, while teaching big ideas, like a class. In fact, I love storytelling and mythology, and I just love movies. And there's a reason why we're drawn to movies, and we're drawn to books, and we're drawn to things that are considered fictional, but there's things about it that are true. In fact, there's a famous line, and I meant to put it in the slides, but I forgot. A famous line from a movie called Secondhand Lions, where he's talking about love and loyalty. And he says, the reason why all these stories that I tell you about my life are in essence, are real. And he said, it doesn't matter if they're real or not. What matters is the things they embody are real. What matters is what is actually real, which is that love matters, and that loyalty matters, and that beauty matters. And I need to find the quote, and I'll post it later, but it's fantastic. But in essence, he's arguing that these stories help us see the bigger pictures and teach us like a class at the same time. They help us feel and also analyze. Lewis argues that Christianity is the ultimate myth because it's a story that really happened. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus are historical events, like something you'd read in a history book, but they also carry the powerful universal meaning of a myth, like a story about a God who dies and comes back. Some scholars, who Lewis thinks are too stubborn, try to break the Bible down into just facts or symbols, missing its bigger truth. He's pushing back against those who say the Jesus story is just a legend or a set of dry ideas. Lewis's point is that Christianity isn't just a list of beliefs or an old tale. It's a true story that hits both your heart and your head. Myth and true myth. It lets you feel God's love like you're part of the story while knowing it happened for real. This makes it different from other myths or abstract philosophies, giving you a way to connect with something bigger than yourself in a real and meaningful way. So, thank you all for being here tonight. Thanks so much for being part of this. For those of you that are watching after the fact, let me know where you're tuning in from. Share the video. Let people know. We love you guys. I'm so grateful for this. We have another great week ahead of us coming up. It's going to be fantastic. But I do need to tell you, it's actually going to be in 2 weeks. And so we're going to be taking a break next week for one reason. I'm going away for a day or two with my family on a little hiking thing. So we're going to have some fun. And so it'll be 2 weeks from today that we'll be back together. Look forward to seeing you all at that time. Until then, I hope you have a fantastic time. If I can ever serve you in any way, send me a message. Love to help you out. Love to pray for you in any way that I can. Love you all. Have a fantastic week. We will see you guys in 2 weeks.